Today, we are looking at 7 tools that once lived in garages across America and are now either outlawed, discontinued, or condemned by safety regulators that no legitimate manufacturer will produce. These were not fringe items sold in back alleys. They were mainstream. Stocked at hardware stores. Advertised in the Sears catalog. Used by ordinary men on ordinary Saturday mornings. And they killed and maimed people at a rate that modern tools, for all their faults, simply do not match. This is not a condemnation of an earlier era. It is a record of what happened when an industry moved faster than the consequences arrived, and what it cost the men who were working in the gap between those two things. Number 7. Split rim wheels inflated outside a safety cage. This is the one that accumulated the longest record of casualties over the longest period of time, and the one that took regulators the most time to bring under enforceable control. Split rim wheels, also called multi-piece wheels, were the standard fitment on large trucks and commercial vehicles for much of the 20th century. A split rim is not a single piece of formed steel. It is 2 or 3 components assembled together, held in their correct shape by the internal pressure of the inflated tire sitting against them. When a tire goes flat and is returned for service, the components must be disassembled, inspected, and reassembled in the precise correct sequence before air is applied. If the locking ring is seated incorrectly and the tire is inflated, the ring can separate from the rim assembly under pressure with the force and velocity of an explosive device detonating at close range. OSHA documented hundreds of fatalities and several thousand serious injuries across decades of commercial vehicle tire service. The regulation that emerged required a physical restraining cage around any multi-piece wheel assembly during inflation, designed to contain the components if the ring releases, so that the energy is absorbed by steel rather than by the man standing next to the compressor. Inflating a multi-piece wheel outside a rated safety cage is a federal violation in any workplace subject to OSHA jurisdiction. The wheels are still in service on older equipment. The men who maintain them understand that the cage is not a suggestion. The men who worked on these wheels in the decades before the cage was required often understood the danger and worked carefully, and some of them died anyway. Because careful is not the same as protected, and no amount of experience closes the gap between those two things when the failure arrives without warning. Number 6. Chainsaw discs for angle grinders. An angle grinder operates at between 10,000 and 12,000 rotations per minute. The abrasive cutting and grinding discs designed for it are engineered to flex under lateral load, because the nature of the work produces lateral force and a rigid disc at that speed will fracture. The engineering tolerances are not optional. They are the reason the tool is survivable to use. A chainsaw disc is a circle of chainsaw teeth pressed into a flat steel plate. It has no designed flex. It has no tolerance for the lateral force that occurs the instant a cut binds, the blade deflects off a hidden fastener, or the operator's grip shifts under the torque reaction of a tool moving at 12,000 rotations per minute. When a chainsaw disc on an angle grinder kicks back, it does not behave like a saw. It rotates at full speed toward the face and upper body of whoever is holding the tool. The documented injury profile includes severed fingers, deep lacerations to the throat and jaw, and fatalities. No major manufacturer listed these discs as an approved product or included them in their compatible accessory catalogs. They came in through import channels, moved through secondary markets, and were bought by men who wanted a faster cut through green wood and did not understand why that particular faster cut was not available from the brands they recognized. The Consumer Product Safety Commission addressed them specifically. Some remain in circulation. The angle grinder is a legitimate tool with a long history of safe use. The chainsaw disc attached to it transfers none of that safety and adds risks that proper discs are designed to eliminate. Number 5. Unstable pin-style jack stands. The name Widowmaker came later, after the accident reports accumulated into a pattern no one could ignore. Early automotive jack stands were stamped or welded from mild steel with a simple pin and notch height adjustment and a flat saddle at the top. They lifted a car off the ground and held it there while a man worked underneath. The design was simple, the price was low, and the stands were everywhere. Men used them every weekend to change oil, replace brake pads, pull exhaust pipes, and access anything the factory had hidden under the chassis. The failure mode was the pin. Under sustained load, with the lateral movement that comes from a wrench torquing against a stubborn fastener, the pin could work partially free of its notch. The stand did not collapse in that moment. It settled, by fractions of an inch, almost imperceptibly, until the geometry shifted past the threshold of support and the stand gave way entirely. A vehicle weighing 3,000 pounds does not give a man time to react. The interval between the stand beginning to move and the vehicle reaching the ground is measured in tenths of a second. Consumer recalls of specific stamped steel models continued into the 2000s after failure rates became part of the CPSC record. Proper stands built to current standards are safe. The problem was that cheap stands and safe stands looked identical to the man buying them, and the difference between them was not visible until it was too late to matter. Number 4. Asbestos brake arcing machines. When drum brakes were standard equipment on American cars, the friction surface of a replacement brake shoe had to be ground to match the exact diameter of the drum it would press against. An imprecise fit meant uneven contact, poor stopping performance, and accelerated wear. The brake arcing machine solved this by running the shoe's friction surface against a curved abrasive wheel, grinding it to the correct profile. The machine was a legitimate engineering solution to a real mechanical problem. It was in every serious brake shop in America from the 40s through the 70s. The friction material on those shoes, across that entire span, was compounded with asbestos fiber. Every pass of the grinding wheel aerosolized asbestos into the shop air. The machines had no meaningful dust containment. The mechanics who ran them daily, and the younger men who swept the grinding dust off the floor around them at the end of a shift, breathed those fibers into their lungs every working day for years. The disease that follows, mesothelioma, does not appear for decades after exposure. Diagnoses among automotive brake workers were documented at rates significantly above the general population. But by the time those diagnoses arrived, the exposure had ended a generation earlier. The machines were not banned as units. The asbestos friction material was phased out under EPA and OSHA regulation through the 1980s, which made the machines inert in the specific way that mattered. What could not be reversed was already permanent in the lung tissue of the men who had stood in those shops every day, not knowing what the dust was doing. Number 3. Early mechanical spring compressors. A coil spring on a front strut assembly stores enough energy to throw a steel component through a cinder block wall. That is not rhetorical. That is the result of calculated force on a compressed spring rated for several hundred pounds of vehicle weight. The spring compressor was the tool designed to hold that energy in place while a mechanic removed the strut nut and disassembled the suspension for service. Early versions were 2 hook-style clamps made of stamped steel, threaded by hand onto the coils, with no secondary retention feature of any kind. Nothing to catch the hook if it slipped. Nothing to warn the user that the grip was failing. If one hook walked free during compression, the spring released everything it had stored in a fraction of a second. The clamp itself became a projectile. The spring became a projectile. Whatever was positioned in the path of either became the point of impact. Documented injuries included orbital fractures, loss of vision in one or both eyes, broken forearms from defensive reactions, and fatalities in commercial repair settings. OSHA eventually required cage-style compressors with full spring retention in any workplace subject to federal inspection. Consumer versions with the original hook design remained on retail shelves long after that, sold to men doing their own suspension work in residential driveways with no training, no cage, and nobody working alongside them. Most of those men finished the job without incident. The ones who did not were doing the same job the same way as everyone else. Number 2. Metal-cased, ungrounded power tools. From the late 1940s through the early 1960s, the drill press, the belt sander, the circular saw, and the electric hand drill all came in metal housings with 2-prong plugs and no ground wire. The logic was straightforward and not entirely wrong. Metal was durable. Metal looked professional. Metal felt like quality in the hand and held up to the kind of abuse that a garage workshop produced over a decade of use. What metal also did, without exception, was conduct electricity directly to the user the moment an internal wire frayed against the casing. A wiring fault in a properly grounded tool trips a breaker. The current finds the path of least resistance back to the panel, and the circuit opens. The same fault in an ungrounded metal-cased tool sends current through the housing, into the hand wrapped around the grip, and through the body of the man holding it against his chest or pressing it into a workpiece. The outcome depends entirely on the path the current takes and the duration of contact. Many outcomes during this period were fatal. Electrocutions in home workshops were documented frequently enough that the National Electrical Code eventually mandated grounding on all portable power tools, and Underwriters Laboratories revised its certification standards to match. The old tools did not vanish from garages overnight. Men used them until they wore out, and some ran for another 2 decades after the standards changed. The ones still running in 1975 were the dangerous ones because the insulation inside had been degrading for 20 years. Number 1. The liquid fuel blowtorch. Before propane became the standard, the blowtorch ran on gasoline or naphtha. A brass tank the size of a thermos pressurized by hand with a built-in pump connected to a burner nozzle that produced a sustained flame hot enough to sweat copper pipe, strip paint from a porch railing, or thaw a frozen water line in the dead of January. Hardware stores stocked them beside the pipe fittings and the sandpaper. Every serious home mechanic and tradesman owned one, and most men who worked with their hands considered it as ordinary a tool as a putty knife. The problem was not the flame. The problem was the fuel tank sitting 4 inches behind it. Overpressurize the tank, and the seam could let go without warning. Heat the nozzle without adequate pressure, and the fuel vaporized backward into the air before it could ignite cleanly, producing an uncontrolled flash instead of a controlled stream. A partial blockage in the burner tip could turn a manageable flame into a fireball in the time it took a man to recognize something was wrong. Garage fires, severe facial burns, and structural house fires traced back to liquid fuel blowtorches were common enough that insurers flagged them by name in claims reports. The industry did not recall them. It simply stopped manufacturing them when propane canisters proved safer, cheaper, and far easier to move off a shelf. The liquid fuel blowtorch was not ended by a single piece of legislation. It was abandoned quietly, by liability and convenience working together, while the men who had burned themselves learning its limits kept that knowledge to themselves. 7 tools. Every one of them was sold openly, used widely, and accepted as ordinary. Some were retired by the market when safer alternatives proved cheaper to produce. Some required decades of documented casualties before regulation arrived. Some remain in partial circulation where enforcement does not reach. The common thread is not negligence on the part of the men who use them. It is that certain tools carry failure modes that skill and discipline alone cannot eliminate. A man who knew exactly what he was doing could still be standing in the wrong place when the locking ring let go. That is the difference between a dangerous era and a dangerous tool. The era is gone. Some of the tools are not, and that is worth remembering.